Goodwill. We just saw in the previous video where we recorded all of the net assets that Roboto purchased, and in there was Goodwill. Again, Goodwill is the company's reputation, and in theory, Goodwill should never decrease unless something bad happens. So what FAS 142 came up with is said that, look, you cannot amortize Goodwill any longer. You can't spread that asset out, because in theory, Goodwill should never go down unless the company has done something to cause it to decrease. So what they did is they come up with a impairment test that must be tested at least annually. And we're going to measure Goodwill to see if it has decreased or increased. And one of the things about Goodwill is that Goodwill that is internally generated, or so the reputation that the company builds over the years, can never be recorded on the company's records. So the only Goodwill that can ever be on a company's balance sheet is any Goodwill they purchase from someone else. So anytime we look at a balance sheet and we see Goodwill, we know that they purchased it somewhere along the way. Well, to test for impairment, we've got to go through a two-step process, and the textbook describes it pretty technically, and it leaves me with a big huh. So let's see how we can do it. We'll try to explain it a little easy so that when you test for Goodwill, you'll know what's going on. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to compare the fair value of the business unit with the carrying value. And this fair value is going to be the total value of the unit, and the carrying value will be whatever values are there. If the fair value is greater than the carrying value, that means Goodwill is not impaired. That means that actually what that means is Goodwill is increased. And since we can't record any internal Goodwill, we do nothing. If the fair value is less than the carrying value, that means Goodwill is impaired. That means that something has happened to cause it to go down. What this step tells us is that, hey, we've got to go a little further, and we've got to see how much that is. And it's not as simple as subtracting the fair value from the carrying value. So let's see what we've got. Let's take a look at an example. In example 1, where the fair value, which will be given to you, is compared to the carrying value. And you notice we have the fair value in the far right hand column. And this is the fair value of all the assets excluding Goodwill. I'll have to give you all this information so you can compute it. We see the fair value of the unit is $3,600. The carrying value of the unit is $3,400. Since the fair value is greater than the carrying value, Goodwill is not impaired. So we just stop right there. In the second example, the fair value of the unit is $3,200. And we see that that is less than the carrying value of $3,400. So Goodwill is impaired. So what that tells us is we've got to see how much it is impaired. So we then have to go and do the following. We're going to take the total fair value of the unit, $3,200, compare that to the fair value without Goodwill. So if the only two things different between these numbers is one has Goodwill and the other doesn't, the difference has to be Goodwill. So with that difference of $400 says, hey, that is our implied Goodwill, or that's the total value of our Goodwill today. Well, if our total value of Goodwill today is $400 and the value we have on our balance sheet is $1,000, that means our Goodwill has gone down by $600. So what we'll do is we'll record this Goodwill impairment loss. We'll debit impairment loss, credit Goodwill for $600. The impairment loss will show up on the income statement in continuing operations. This Goodwill of $400 will remain there until it gets tested again each and every year. If we test it again next year and the fair value of the company is greater than the carrying value, that means Goodwill has gone up. But the problem is we can't record any internally generated Goodwill. And that's what would be the case because the value has gone up, so we can't record it. So once it goes down, we can never write it up.